Hello, I'm live reacting to Newcastle United's defeat against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. Just wait for a few more people to come in. I'll just put it on Twitter and Blue Sky. If you don't follow me, by the way, on Twitter or Blue Sky, that's where usually I'm most active. Blue Sky, I'm trying to move across to for obvious reasons, which I won't get into on here. But just post on Twitter and everything. And yeah, if you're in the chat, do put some thoughts in the box, and I'll get into it in a minute. But yeah, just give me 2 seconds to advertise it and all that. Putting for Newcastle, I thought disappointing result, and it's the same sorts of things, the same issues, the same mistakes, the same troubles are there for Newcastle at every single possible turn. It feels like at the moment. It feels like Newcastle they struggled to impose themselves on the game. It didn't feel like at any point in the game that they were on top of Chelsea. I think they created chances in the second half, and at that point it felt like the game was a little bit sort of to and fro, but it never felt like Newcastle were ever in full control, and ultimately that's cost them. And this is a team that you feel like, we've spoken about it for months on these lives, on videos and various different things. This team feels like it lacks an identity now, and ultimately, that's quite a deep-rooted issue, and you've got to look at various different things as to why that is. I think just for one thing, the big thing that I'll focus on in my tactical analysis video that will come out tomorrow is that the ball was turned over far too many times in midfield, and Chelsea were having Madueke and Palmer and Jackson on the ball facing Newcastle's defence or in behind Newcastle's defence, and that was far too often. I mean, inside the first 5 minutes, they with one with the offside goal for Palmer. That was just a knee offside. It was nothing that Newcastle did to they were just very, very lucky with that. And then there were chances in the second half for Palmer, and Pope had far too many shots at him, and people were just facing him too much from a Newcastle perspective to make it a positive, to make it anything, to make it competitive. And yeah, for me, I mean, it's summed up by the second goal. Summed up by the second goal for me. Isak missed it 75 seconds in the second half. They've just got themselves back into the game. There's a platform from which to build. Isak misses the ball. The ball is played into Palmer, and Palmer gets all of the credit and everything from Alan Smith on commentary and everything, which is obviously fair enough. It's great that from a Chelsea perspective, from a neutral perspective, that Cole Palmer is playing so well, but he didn't do anything. He had far too much space throughout the game, and he had far too much space to run at Newcastle's defence then, and it was pathetic. It really was. It was a pathetic goal to concede at a really poor time, put Newcastle immediately back on the back foot. They were run ragged again in the moments afterwards, which they were when they went behind. They gradually got themselves back into the game in the first half, levelled. They gradually got themselves back into the second half and created chances and should have equalised. Obviously, the Isak one stands out when he goes through, takes it around the keeper and should put it away, but doesn't. And then, other chances as well. Just plenty of good build-up play, decent build-up play, especially once Longstaff and Joe Willett came on. Sandro Tonali got 67 minutes today as opposed to 65, but still, same part of the game he comes off for Longstaff. And yeah, there's just something. Obviously, Anthony Gordon wasn't playing today. I thought Harvey Barnes did okay. I thought Lewis Hall was Newcastle's best player. It was a difficult afternoon for Dan Burn, which is natural. I mean, Dan Burn has done really well this season, but up against a pacey striker and confident striker like Jackson, who lots of people have not rated for a while and ridiculed. I've always thought he's got a lot of quality. I've always seen a sort of parallel between him and Didier Drogba's early days at Chelsea. I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Drogba, but just in terms of the fact that he's got a lot of raw ability, and the thing that he misses is quality in terms of in terms of the ability to finish. One comment in from James. Thanks, James, for getting in touch. A flawed transfer policy coming home to roost. 120 odd million and spent on Isak and Tonali that needs to be spread thinner. We need to try and do it again on Gahey. Yeah, and we try to do it again on Gahey. Yeah, I think it's less for me. It's less Isak and Tonali, but I take your point completely. I think £38 million on Harvey Barnes is another great example. Livramento and Hall, as good as they're doing today, and again, Hall, as I said, Harvey Barnes did really well today. But fundamentally, did these deals, and I've said in previous videos, we don't want to keep going back over the same issues every week. But I said in previous videos and live streams that it feels like, and this has been pointed out by people like Dan Ashworth at the club and various other people who've said that Newcastle can't get a lot wrong as on this journey because of PSR, because of the markets in which they're trying to build to get to compete in, and the players that they need to attract for that. They need to spend a lot of money, as you know, Tonali and Isak are great examples. They need to make big calls on big players to try and break into that market regularly, which will effectively unlock their ability as best they can to become a big club, because they can't just spend and spend, as we know, like City did and like Chelsea did before them. But they can't make many mistakes, and I think that they have made mistakes, and the mistakes that they've made. I would give you three great examples of mistakes with hindsight that they've made. Not cashing on Miguel Almiron after the Champions League season, when his value and his stock was as high as it's ever been in his career. That was the time to try and cash in on him. Callum Wilson, likewise, 2 or 3 months later, he was in the England squad. He should have been. Sorry, I got my years wrong, but he'd just been in the England squad, for the World Cup. Then he'd gone and scored 18 goals in the Premier League, or 18 goals in an entire season that year, off the back of, really, really good dovetailing with Isak off the bench. That was sort of the bedrock of where Newcastle built in that spring. He could have gone then, and that didn't go. And his contract had a decent point in it to at a decent level of time in it to build from as well. He wasn't at this age, and that was a great time to cash in on those two players. And Harvey Barnes came in. I think there's a lot of, you could say, Livramento as well, but I think, I understand Livramento a little bit more because they were noticing that Trippier was the key player in their team, and they knew he was getting older, and they knew that they couldn't rely on him too long for that much longer, and that sort of proved to be a sensible acquisition. But particularly Barnes doubling up on two left wingers and leaving that right winger berth free, and but again, I think it is. I don't want to keep going over transfers and keep going over big picture stuff, but the trouble is that every defeat and everything, it comes from, you can pinpoint it on the pitch. You can pinpoint the fact that they don't have enough quality to be on the ball. That Cher and Byrne can't play the ball into midfield with enough pizzazz, with enough force. Tonali and Bruno are trying to do different things. They haven't quite meshed together yet. So between those two things, that allows the space in the middle to be picked off, which obviously Cole Palmer is the best in the league at doing at the moment. He obviously did that really, really well. And that's how Chelsea, I thought that was Chelsea's biggest way of getting through, and biggest way of getting in, of getting this win was by doing that, was by winning the space, and was by attacking that space in the middle, and always seeming to be facing Newcastle. Newcastle rarely turned Chelsea round consistently enough to really dominate their game and get themselves into a point where I thought that they were actually going to, I never thought in the second half that a goal was coming, and it wasn't necessarily because the chances weren't good enough, because obviously the Isak one was, but there was just not enough to convince me about what Newcastle were doing to make me think. And I think there are fundamental issues there. We can keep going on about it, but it looks a bit difficult now, because Newcastle have Chelsea at home in the League Cup on Wednesday, I believe. And if you listen to True Faith and the podcast that I do over there on Patreon, We've spoken quite a lot about this double header against Chelsea, and one of them being away, and that being this game that nobody thought in any of the podcasts that I did thought that Chelsea would win that game, and then that Newcastle would win that game. But then the League Cup game at St James's Park, lots more confidence, and I think it comes down to a flawed process of trying to work out how to play away from home. The same mistakes keep happening. They play a high line. There's no pressure in midfield. They're too slow in the build-up. No intensity. So the two things tend to go hand in hand with intensity and with a high line. You need intensity to make a high line to make pushing up and trying to get on the front foot effective, because Newcastle didn't sit back today. As I said, Cher and Byrne trying to play the ball into midfield, trying to get Newcastle pushed up the pitch. It didn't work, and the reason it didn't work is because there was no intensity and pressure from the team when they were pressing. There was nothing to suggest that they kept leaving and dropping deep whenever Chelsea won the ball, which you can sort of, in a sense, you can understand, but at the same time, it basically gives Palmer the space he needs to attack Newcastle and anyone. He didn't even need space with the first goal, did he? Got passes is outstanding, but they kept doing it, and it led to that second goal. And just a really, really, really poor performance all round. I thought, didn't think that Newcastle deserved much. James just comes back, it's gone. On this game alone, Isak gives the ball away 2-1. He fluffs the equaliser as poor as we were today. Individual mistakes were key, yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, individual mistakes often keep happening, and I think that's individual mistakes can happen. But if there's a fundamental, better structure to the team will benefit from that longer term, and it'll work out a bit better. It didn't. That didn't happen today. Didn't happen against Brighton either, although they created chances. And I think fundamentally that my issue is that I'm sort of, there seems to be this need and this sort of, this is where Newcastle are at the moment, and there's a reality of where Newcastle are. So I can understand this sort of explanation to a point, but when do you start thinking about bigger picture things? When something has got, whether it's Eddie Howe's future, whether it's, I don't know, a real rip up of the team and accepting and restarting again. Because the thing is, they're sort of into this, as James has rightly pointed out, they've spent big on players, and it's kind of pushed them into a corner where they've got a really unbalanced squad, and they try to do things that they can't do. So, I think I saw a video on The Athletic explaining Newcastle's tactics, why they're struggling so much. And it's because they try to do the same thing effectively, which is try and play through teams with a high line and try and dominate the ball through the middle. But teams are much more able and much more willing to bypass whatever Newcastle do in the middle by going over the top of them and turning them round in that space in behind. And that's what Newcastle have really struggled with for a long, long time. And it keeps happening. And as I say, at what point do you start to question really where the fundamental direction of the team and the club is? Because there is a sense of, by the way, if you are in the live and you have, please like the stream because it really helps push it up and get it to more people. So yeah, please do like the stream to help it push, and yeah, drop some comments in as well. With Newcastle, it feels like they haven't adapted to things. They haven't adjusted. They haven't done anything different in a couple of years, while also not improving the squad in the last. As I said, my biggest issue is you can't really count Tonali because of his ban. Recruitment-wise, they've not made first-team signings for bona fide first-team signings when they've arrived, who instantly, like they did with Isak, Botman, Pope, Gordon. Gordon didn't really sort of work out for 6 months, and maybe that's why they bought Barnes in. But yeah, there's a problem. James has asked, do you think maybe standards of slips could be a malaise of a stale squad? It could be Howe's message is not getting through. I think there is, as I say, there is something. You've got to wonder if there's something more fundamental, whether it's the case or not, and because the same things keep happening. And I don't know. What I think is that there's maybe different messages from the sporting director role. Obviously, if you think about the difference between Dan Ashworth and Paul Mitchell, they're very different in the way that they approach their job. So Dan Ashworth was always more center of the wheel. He was always sort of like, we're going to bring in this ethos of and building towards something and building to, we're going to bring in players who've got a lot of potential, who can become really good players, and we're going to look sort of 5-10 years into the future in the similar sort of way that he obviously was trying to do with Brighton and certainly did with England. Paul Mitchell's much more a sort of like recruitment guy who's got a real good sort of track record of making first teams very efficient and sustainable. It's not quite the same thing. It might sound very similar, but it's not. And I think that's where the problems lie, is that Ashworth's way of working, of trying to build, people like Livramento and people like Hall, trying to go for that sort of player. Yankuba Minter was under his watch as well, and looking sort of 5-10 years into the future. That is only good enough if the team is right, and the team has suffered badly from not having enough quality in the to increase to make it better in the last couple of years immediately for now, and that's why something has gone wrong. I think for me, I've complained about this before. I think there's too many excuses made. I think after every game, well, it was injuries, well, it was this, well, it was this. I think there's got to be some serious questions, because it's all right saying that the club wants to get somewhere and wants to do something, but you ultimately you won't get anywhere by losing games like this in the way that it's not just losing to Chelsea. That can happen. Chelsea are a good side, absolutely, but it's in the way that they're losing, the way that they consistently lose in the same way, particularly away from home. There are serious questions, and yes, you can say Newcastle are not in that. You shouldn't. It was always a big tall order to make them a strong squad, a strong team from where they were, and they did overachieve initially. But also, to flip it, you've got Tonali who's a proven Champions League player in this squad. You've got Isak, and this is just in the team today. You've got Isak, you've got Bruno, you've got Joe Linton, who's become a real powerhouse of a player in that team, all today. And those players are good enough to get into the Chelsea team. I think Bruno on his day is good enough to get in the Man City team. I will appreciate and caveat this by they didn't play particularly well, and they haven't been playing particularly well either. So it's not like I'm saying that it's all everybody else's fault in those players, but I just think that there's been a lot of tempering of expectations, and they overachieved in 2022. But now I think that with the quality of the players that they've managed to keep, because other teams in their situation wouldn't have kept them. Gordon would have gone because of PSR, and even Villa have sold and still look. And admittedly, Newcastle's season started to go downhill a little bit later than the Villa's at this stage. And there are signs that they're struggling to react to Champions League games. They drew with Bournemouth yesterday. They've drawn with Manchester United. It's at home after Bayern Munich. They've struggled as well. So the jury's out a little bit out on Villa. The jury is out a little bit. The jury is out a little bit on Villa. Sorry, I should say, but there's still this sort of idea that they are progressing in a better way than Newcastle were. They have a proven winner, of European pedigree on the touchline. Newcastle, it's all right building for the future and building, but everybody is learning. So how can you guarantee that everyone will get to that, will have that mentality? Sometimes you need to bring in somebody who's done it, and Newcastle haven't got enough of that in the key moments. I think that is it. So we are going to end up talking about fundamental problems after every defeat, because the defeats come from individual mistakes or key moments you can pinpoint. As I said, Isak's losing the ball in the start of the second half is today's, but you've also got not reacting to the quick mistake, not reacting to the quick free kick against Brighton. You've got poor in possession. You've got fundamental things like that in terms of the the structure of the team, but there can be you think you can improve on, but aren't being improved on. But there are deeper things. Every time that a club has done really well in recent years, you look at Villa now, you look at Newcastle 2 years ago, you look at teams like Brighton and teams like Wigan, even sort of 10, 15 years ago when they were flying high. What's the common denominator between all of those things, all of those teams? What Southampton's another great example as well. What is the common denominator between all of those teams and what they're praised for? It's recruitment. They get their recruitment right. And fundamentally, for now, Newcastle are lacking because of recruitment decisions they've made. You look at the benches today, and Chelsea has spent £1 billion, and you shouldn't expect to really be able to compete with that because they've spent a hell of a lot of money, and that team is underachieving for the money that they've spent. They should be the best team in the world for the level of investment they've had over the last couple of years. But Newcastle's bench was really poor again, and it's not for a lack of. It's not like this team is decimated by injuries anymore, and the squad still looks a little bit weak. And that comes from choices that were made, whether it was Isak and Tonali, as James says. I don't tend to agree. I think those signings have risen. Tonali, the jury is obviously a little bit out, but Isak, Bruno, the sort of bigger signings that Newcastle made for the first team have been generally very good. What they've done is they've looked too far into the future and spent, the same amounts of those, Livramento cost more than Botman did, and Barnes cost more than Botman did. Barnes cost more than Bruno did initially, and various other players as well. So money has been spent on players that strengthen the squad or strengthen the future, and rather than strengthening the first team for far too long. And I think ultimately that's why we're in this position. But but to James's point, I think about the message not getting through. I think the message maybe is different. I don't think they are actively trying to do what they did 2 years ago. They're not the same team. They don't have that sort of energy or intensity or power about them anymore. They just don't look as physically imposing as they used to. And you've got to wonder, because the players are still there, and the ability you would imagine is still there. It's still richly the same squad, but they're not doing it anymore. And you can only imagine that that's fundamental and also deliberate. Eddie Howe has previously said he wants to move into a sort of possession-based team, but there's no zip, there's no energy, there's nothing about the team, I think, that really sort of makes them look a menace when they're in possession. I think it's really, again, I said in a video last week, I read out some stats, and someone came and said about Sean Longstaff, and lots of people said in the comments that Longstaff is you can make stats about Longstaff or anybody to suit an agenda, but the fact is that midfield of Tonali, Bruno, and Joe Linton has never won together, and the team has stopped winning games because of Sean Longstaff since Sean Longstaff's been out of the team. And it was the same sort of thing last season. This is what I'm saying. It's not necessarily what he brings to the team. It's what he allows the other players to do. He knits everything together a bit better. I'm not, again, advocating for him coming in necessarily, because I think ultimately Tonali and Bruno has to work for the sake of the future, really, because that's where two of the biggest signings have been made. But when you look at Bruno, Tonali, and Joe Linton, they look like three very good players, all doing their jobs fairly well next to each other. But the general strand of that midfield suffers. Whereas when Longstaff comes on, a lot of the stuff that he does isn't great. And actually, when he's in possession, he's not great. So when eyes are on him, people perhaps don't look at him and think he's doing a good job. But you'll see other players doing better things. Like I thought Newcastle were much better at winning second balls throughout the first half and much of the second half. They were really poor at winning second balls. The ball always seemed to bounce back to a Chelsea player at any opportunity. It stopped happening so much when Longstaff came onto the pitch. That's an example of something that maybe Longstaff is better. It allows Newcastle's midfield maybe to gain better control because of the stuff that he does now. Hopefully Tonali can do that and Bruno can do that going forward. But that's just an example of this Longstaff, people are very quick to criticize Longstaff, and I understand why, because when eyes are on him, he misplaced a couple of passes today. That sort of thing is very key, is very common with him, and I think ultimately you can't carry a player like that eventually when you get to that level. But at the same time, it's this. There's still masses of space in the midfield when Tonali, Bruno, and Joe Linton play together, and they're still not powerful. They're still not imposing themselves onto the midfield, onto the battle, and making Newcastle the dominant force. I can't remember the last time I watched Newcastle and thought they're a dominant team here. They are making the teams, the opposition, succumb to them in a way that they were consistently doing 2 years ago, albeit with a different style. So. Yeah, I'm not advocating it by for 1 second saying that Longstaff is the way forward, but there are just some key things that maybe the team needs to learn to do without him to really sort of let go of the idea that he needs to be in the team. Because other than that, it really feels like it does feel like there's a bit of trouble brewing with that. But yeah, if you are in the stream and you haven't already, please like it. And subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already. Lots of Newcastle United content coming up. Obviously, we'll be reacting. There'll be an analysis video of this game on Monday, reacting to the Chelsea Cup game on Wednesday, and then obviously looking ahead to Arsenal on Thursday as well. And also, for anyone who isn't aware, I'm also doing a different thing on a weekend where I go to a different game across England and across Europe, depending on various factors, finding out different stories, showing you what it's a little bit like as a journalist covering a football match, and sort of giving a flavour of what English football and European football is like behind the curtain. Because I really feel like there's lots of stories that don't get told in this game. So the first video was up. I went to Manchester City's game yesterday. I've given my thoughts from the Etihad, so go and check that out if you haven't already. But games from across English football down to League Two, non-league, the conference, or Panorama National League, I should say now, and also hopefully abroad as well. Videos like that, more videos like, if you haven't checked out, please do go and check it out, because I was really proud of this video on Schalke from April. I went out to Gelsenkirchen and looked and watched the game. And gave you a bit of a flavour. I did a piece for BBC Sport and went and gave you a bit of a flavour of what it's like to cover a football match and watch a team like Schalke, who are a huge team, struggling in Germany. Really, really great story. It could have been really disastrous. It ended up not being, but that's the aim of the new way of doing what I'm trying to do with the channel. I'm trying to find stories and tell stories that maybe wouldn't get the aren't necessarily newsworthy, but are really, really interesting, because there's loads of real quality and character around English football, particularly in the lower leagues, that I'm really looking to exploit. So join me next Saturday for a game. I haven't decided where it'll be yet, but it'll be in the lower echelons of English football. I've been to Man City. I've seen what the very best do. I want to go down and see something else at a lower level. So please join me for that. But yeah, back to Newcastle. Did anyone? I mean, if you're in the chat, please respond to this question. I'll put it out to the chat. Did anyone come into this game expecting anything different than what happened today? Did anyone expect a different result, a different performance? Did you, or was it? Because for me, the disappointing thing is it was all very, very, it was all very predictable. It was all very easy to see it coming, and because it's happened before, it's very similar to the Fulham game. James, you didn't expect anything different? You were hoping for a better performance or a better win, better result. I mean, hoping for Chelsea, it might have been poor. I think ultimately that's kind of it, isn't it? The hope that you had coming into this game, and I will stress that I think Wednesday is different. I think it's St James's Park. It's really funny, as I said. It was really funny to say about the pods we did on True Faith, that we went through this game and it was all quite widely across the board. We all said that we thought Newcastle would lose this game. We went through again on a future. We sort of previewed the next 6 fixtures from Brighton or next few fixtures between Brighton and Forest, I think it was. And then, we got to Chelsea in the League Cup at home, and everyone said a victory. So I just think that shows how different Newcastle are at home and away. I know that they lost to Brighton, but it was probably one of their better performances of the season. But I agree with you completely, James. I think it really was one of those games where you were hoping Chelsea would be poor. But the trouble is that they're in sort of decent shape at the moment. Ever since they seem to be growing and doing something. They're still very fragile. I think Newcastle showed that. I think a better team in a better place than Newcastle were, or if Newcastle were themselves in a better place, it would have been a different result because they gave chances away in the second half. They're not great defensively, and there are issues there. But the fact is that their midfield balance works better with Caicedo's really starting to come into it now, and Lavia, obviously he was injured last season, looks a lot better. Palmer's continuing the form that he had last year. He's showing that he isn't just a flash in the pan. And Nicholas Jackson's on good form. And then you've got Madueke on the right-hand side. The great thing, and credit to Enzo Maresca, the great thing Chelsea have got this season is that they seem to have got the most. They seem to be getting the most out of a number of players who had a point to prove this season. And Newcastle were interested in a deal for Madueke in the summer on a loan deal if they could. They couldn't get it over the line. I think basically because in that pre-season, Madueke was really showing himself to be a quality player to Maresca, and then obviously it took off when he scored that hat-trick at Wolves, and he's not really looked back, and I thought he was really good. Chelsea were able to find him far too much today, but James is right. Newcastle were coming into this game, and you were hoping Chelsea would have an off day, and there were times where, as I say, a Newcastle in a better frame of mind. And I do think confidence was a big part of it, because if you think about the fact that they were nervous at the start, and then they conceded twice. I mean, the first one didn't count, but they conceded 2 goals and they looked really ragged. Took themselves a while to get back into it. Finally did get back into it. And then they had a platform to build from. Let it slip again, and then they were ragged for 20 minutes again after that. And then suddenly, once they calmed down and Chelsea regressed a little bit and took the foot off the pedal, there was space for Newcastle. So it's a confidence issue. It's not a quality issue, I don't think, in terms of going forward. I mean, as I say, that midfield really does have a lot of class in it. And Alexander Isak up front is hopefully one of the positives from today is that Isak has finally scored again for the second time this season after the Spurs game. He looked really poor against Brighton, obviously didn't look sharp. Missed a couple of decent opportunities today, but obviously getting back on the score sheet, hopefully in the long run, that'll give him the platform to build. But I mean, what's the outlook for the season? For the season currently, is it too hyperbolic to say that there's a potential for Eddie Howe's future? As I said, something big happening in a couple of weeks, maybe at the international break after Nottingham Forest, with Chelsea coming up in the cup on, that's a huge season-defining game at this early stage. Arsenal then follow at St James's on Saturday at 12:30, so that's another massive game. They'll be, they're obviously going for the title. That's going to be a really big game for them. And then Forest, who are obviously flying themselves. Chris Wood's in great form. They won at St James's Park in the same way, much the same way, and doing the same things that Chelsea did on the half turn and on the counter attack as Chelsea exploited today. Forest did on Boxing Day last year. So again, fundamental issues that keep happening. Could we be in a position where something really serious there's some really serious questions are asked in just a few weeks' time? Let me know in the comments whether you think. I mean, do you think? Are you starting to wonder if Eddie Howe should not be in the hot seat anymore? Are you starting to wonder whether he's the right man? James has been really active in the comment section today. I really appreciate that. You said earlier that standards maybe have slipped and there might be a deep-rooted issue. Do you question whether Eddie Howe is still the man? I think this season will not be one of progress in the mid-table. At best, we can hope for. If the players stay behind Howe, I think it'll pick up. The trouble is, as we've seen with Isak's contract news this week, that is a much. I will address this. I think that is much of a nothing story at this stage. It's not like him not signing a new contract or him signing a new contract or not is going to be definitive, but it's the message it sends that because and from the club's perspective with Isak, he was already on sort of similar money to what Gordon and Bruno and Joe Linton, who have since signed contracts, are on. But it's about the message it sends. If Newcastle don't get into the top four, Arsenal are going to come looking for Isak. Man City might come looking for Bruno and the team, and possibly maybe the top six. I don't know, but certainly European football at the end of this season, which doesn't look like it's on the cards at this stage, does it? Then suddenly you've got questions being asked from players, and if one or two of those players go, then it's a restart, and maybe that might be for the best in the long run. But the trouble I have, I think, is that Newcastle had something where they could build in a way that Villa have now, and there is a place in that top six, well, top five and top four. Top six and looking to push into the top four, I think, is where anyone who isn't already established should be looking. Because Manchester United are no great shakes. Spurs still, they lost today. They can't seem to find their consistency. Chelsea are starting to take advantage of that, and Villa at the moment are taking advantage of that. But that's where Newcastle should be, and that's where they were. And even though they pushed on a little bit, they pushed on a little bit far in 2022 and got into the Champions League way before. And the narrative was, well, they've got into the Champions League, like, it might be difficult next season. It proved to be difficult, but actually, I think my biggest issue with it is that they didn't do everything in their power to make sure that they gave it the best go, because they kind of settled for something, and that it feels like the club is building towards this future that might never appear because they keep having to sell their best players to Champions League clubs, so they may never be able to push on. It's like a lot of these things people talk about, clubs like Brighton and things like that, and those teams being, always seem to be, they seem to be, they are the darlings of the PSR world. They've navigated that perfectly. They've got this ability to buy players for little, sell players for a lot, which is great. But it's also capped at something. You can never really progress, because if they ever get into the top four, if they ever break if they ever break into that, then they get picked off. The manager goes, their players go. Newcastle they broke in, they kept all their players, and yet they're still struggling. I think that's my biggest problem with Newcastle, is that they've done everything right. They've kept, you're often told if you do too well, your players get picked off. You got enough. You struggle to sort of react to that, and ultimately you get picked off. And that could well happen this season. But they've had chances. They've had 2 years, Newcastle, between this from that summer in 2022 to really build something for now. And they've spent 150 million pounds that summer. They neglected to spend a further 70 this year. That's money that could have turned them into something. And I think that's what my biggest problem with Newcastle is ultimately it feels like they've washed the opportunity. People seem to be dropping out of the live, so I think I might drop it here. Thanks very much for joining me on this instant reaction. I'll be back with a video tomorrow reacting with a more sort of keen, deeper eye. We'll watch the game again. I'll calm down a little bit and I'll watch it back, and I'll pick out a couple of things tactically or fundamentally that I want to discuss in the video. So please do tune into that. As I say, like, share, and subscribe for more Newcastle United content, but also to follow me on this journey across English and European football. Let me know some clubs and some teams that you want me to watch, and really looking forward to that. Thanks very much for joining me, and I'll see you tomorrow for my analysis video. Cheers.